This is a Hope 1032 podcast.
To She Wasn't Born Yesterday for women who are 40 plus fabulous by the Empty Nest Chicks. I'm Janet Evans, ex-M&C Saatchi advertising creative who have won numerous radio and TV awards. Not that that'll affect us because we're doing a podcast.
And I'm Dr. Amelia Haynes, who has been a medical doctor for 30 years and specialising in sexual health and mental health and relationships, and I'm generally a very useful human being.
Well, we'll find out about that, but we are here to work together.
People tell me on good authority that I am.
Really? Yes, well, they never say that to me, so I think we're the perfect hosts for She Wasn't Born Yesterday. We never shy away from the tough topics, do we?
No.
We like a bit of a tough topic. And today we are going to be talking about quite a confronting topic, but a very important topic. And this does affect women who are 40 plus, fabulous as well, but also actually across the board, women of all ages, obviously, because we're going to be talking about escaping domestic violence. And the idea, of course, is what's the best way to support women and children in domestic violence situations. Have you ever known anybody in a domestic violence situation personally?
Yes, I suppose both personally and professionally, which is no surprise, seeing as it's 1 out of 4 of us, I think.
Yes, I read that stat during the week that, in fact, in Australia, on average, 1 woman a week is murdered by her current or former partner, which means there's 52 women a year. But, these aren't just numbers. These are people. These are individuals who are loved by families, by huge circles of people. It's just incredibly devastating. I have had a personal experience with domestic violence myself because my sister was going out with a guy who had bipolar disorder.
Illness.
Yeah. And when he didn't take his meds, he was just sort of off the planet. And unfortunately, she sort of stuck with him because she thought she could help him and support him, which was a wonderful sentiment. And he would sort of erode her little by little if he was not feeling well. So he would tell her that she was flirting with a musician at some live gig they went to, and she'd be, don't be ridiculous. And he was very sort of paranoid about that. But they were moving house. Ironically, they were moving in together. The day they were moving, it was in Brisbane, massively hot, hectic, stressful. Their ute broke down. They ended up at midnight arriving at the place, just clutter everywhere. And they had a huge argument about something, and he just pushed her violently against a wall.
Yeah.
And she just lost it. She ran out, called the police. Bizarrely, a close relative of ours turned up. She's a detective in Brisbane, turned up at the scene, and it was and took her to a safe place. This sort of happened early in their relationship, and it did escalate because she tried to get a restraining order on him, which didn't work because he let down all the tyres in her car in the car park where she worked. And also, maliciously, she had a piano and was on the veranda where they were moving to, supposedly moving in together. They never did. But he bent back every single individual key on the piano, inside the piano, which is incredible. But she couldn't prove it because she didn't have any evidence. But so that just sort of shows you that I suspect that a lot of women have a lot of personal experience with domestic violence, even if it's not them themselves. Today, to talk about this issue and what can be done about it, and not just about women in this situation, but also the children who might be involved, we have 2 incredible guests, and we're very excited today to talk to Jenny Woodhouse and Justine O'Malley. Jenny and Justine, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you.
Well, just to give you a little bit of background on them, Jenny's a Pastoral Care Coordinator with the Church and Missionary Society of New South Wales and ACT, and formerly chaplain of the Sydney Anglican Church's Professional Standards Unit. Justine, you're a social worker and counsellor, and you have over 30 years' experience working with children and young people, specialising in supporting children's social and emotional development, especially kids aged 3 to 13 years. The first thing we might want to clarify, perhaps with you, Jenny, is what exactly is the difference between domestic violence, domestic abuse, coercive control, family violence.
Just the small questions, Jenny.
just to kick us off. Or are they sort of all really the same thing?
I would say they're all really the same thing. It's been extended to away from the word violence out to abuse. Violence, I think, conjures up for us the sense of physical violence, whereas domestic abuse is more largely emotional, psychological abuse. So it's a broader term. Family violence is, I guess, broadens it out even more to include abuse against kids. And any child witnessing domestic abuse is also one of the victims of the abuse, whether they're directly being abused or not. Coercive control will be next year in New South Wales, at least, will be against the law. So coercive control is recognising more of the concept of emotional, psychological abuse against people and describing more of what that means and pulling it away from what we would traditionally think of as physical violence.
It was interesting because you mentioned children in that description, but Justine, this is your particular specialist area, isn't it? Working with children who have experienced domestic violence?
Yes, and the latest statistics that have come out of the Australian Childhood Maltreatment Study that was released in April of this year tell us that almost 40% of children in Australia are exposed to family and domestic violence before they're 18. That's creeping up to almost half of our children in Australia will have an exposure to family and domestic violence in their own homes. That's an incredible amount.
Yeah, that is extraordinary.
Wow.
Yeah.
So does that mean that almost 50% of homes have a domestic violence element in them?
At some point they will have exposure to that. So absolutely. We're looking at now 1 in 4 women will experience physical or sexual abuse, but that's not including the coercive control.
Yeah.
So when you add coercive control into that statistic, absolutely, we are looking at extremely high numbers.
Incredible. Is this actually rising or is this just being noticed more? Is there just more awareness around this at the moment?
Look, probably a little bit of both. We are recognising things like coercive control, especially we've learnt a lot from the public sharing of Hannah's Clark's story from Queensland. A lot better understanding around coercive control and an understanding that our first responders, our police, social workers, everyone working with families and communities need to have a better understanding of coercive control and not to dismiss that because previously, unless, as you were saying, Jenny, the link was often more around the physical abuse. And if there wasn't, visible bruises, then perhaps it may have gone unnoticed or minimised or dismissed.
Yeah.
So what is actually coercive control? How would you define that?
Yeah. So probably one of the things we can do is think about what some of the red flags of coercive control are, because this both helps us to understand from a professional context, but also as women with friends, if you see some of these red flags, they're things that you can start to have a discussion with. They're things that you can open the doors to discussion and say, I'm here to listen. So things like probably often starts with the love bombing. People may say, but that's wonderful to have someone that's sending you flowers and ringing you every minute of the day and wants to spend all their time with you. But when this happens within the first week of a relationship and they're talking about marriage and having children together and I've never wanted to be with anyone but you. And in fact, they were saying all of this to someone else a month ago and that someone else a month prior to that. That's what we refer to as love bombing. So it's something to raise the antennas. It's kind of that first red flag. The monitoring of activity is also a really strong part of coercive control. So it's wanting to control and know what your partner is doing every moment of the day. It may be actually using surveillance. So we have a lot of technology abuse. And when we talk about the increase, technology, whilst there's lots of amazing and wonderful things that technology can do for us in 2023, it unfortunately has also increased the ability for someone to monitor someone, whether it's that they're tracking them on their phone phone, known or unknown, whether it's they're placing something on their car, all of those sorts of things. So they're really wanting to monitor what they're doing. They're also isolating them from their support. So again, they're wanting to control. When we talk about that coercively controlling someone, they're wanting to stop them from having connections with those people in their lives that previously would have been able to perhaps see red flags or would have had the opportunity to talk with them. So stopping them from seeing their friends and their family by saying, you don't need anyone else. You've got me. We've got this special connection.
Right.
You don't need to go and see your mum, or you don't need to hang out with your friends. Why would you hang out with your friends? I really feel really sad that you don't want to spend the Friday night with me. So it's a lot of that manipulative type of in the initial stages of the relationship. Then it really might be starting to withdraw that love. So it's the little love bombing at the beginning, but then starting to withdraw it. It might be that name calling, that really severe criticism. Controlling the finances is, again, a really big red flag. And so, a lot of what we look at in supporting women is things like, being able to have a driver's license and be able to go for, driving lessons. For some women, that's what's, a prohibitive factor because they don't have access to money to be able to do that. Controlling everything that they spend the money on, whether even it's for the household or for, personal, items for themselves or the children. But they're really controlling all aspects, controlling their ability to go to work. So a lot of families that I've worked with, the women have not been allowed to work. And it's rarely said that I don't want you to work because I want to control you. It's more that you don't need to work. I'll provide for you. You can stay home. The reason behind it is actually to be able to control the finances. The jealous and the accusations. So, when they're out and about, it's, saying that they've looked at somebody or that, obviously, you've got your phone next to you because you're expecting a phone call from someone. So it's, that regular ongoing. And this all then becomes part of gaslighting. And that's another really important term for us to be aware of because it's making the victim survivor actually question themselves. Did I look at somebody when I was in the shopping centre? So now when they're in the shopping centre, they look to the ground the entire time because they've started to actually question themselves. Regulating their sexual relationship. It may be that they're forcing them to have sex every single day. There's no pleasure or, enjoyment for the female in this sexual activity. Definitely control. This all then loops back to what's portrayed, I should say, in pornography is very often very male-dominated, controlling, no pleasure for a female. And that's often replicated, which is unfortunately what a lot of our young people are getting their messages about sexuality from. That's where they're learning about sexuality is through pornography. We had a young girl say to us recently in one of our healthy relationships training, I really don't want to have sex because I don't want to be strangled.
Here we go again.
She actually thought it was a requirement of sex was that you have to be strangled because that's what they're seeing in pornography. And then probably the last one that I'll just say around the coercive control is actually manipulating and threatening children and pets. So, if you ever think of leaving me, as one of my young women that I've worked with was told, you'll be leaving in a box and you'll never see your children again. They may actually encourage the purchase of pets because they know that will be something else they can manipulate and use against the female. A lot of shelters aren't able to take pets in, so that's often, one of the prohibitive factors, of many, but can be one of those prohibitive factors to actually leaving the home is because the fear of leaving your pet behind. Actually, in WA, they're looking at creating with the RSPCA a program so that pets can go there so that women can leave and actually go into a shelter.
Yeah.
So they're just a few parts of the coercive control, but it's very slow that it happens. That's the problem.
Just hearing you talk just then, it's a terrible, terrible list. I think a lot of us hearing this, or certainly me right now, I'm thinking, how does anyone actually leave? When people say, why don't people just leave? That's terrible. Why don't they just go? Certainly, that list explains a lot of why people find it so hard. In fact, I think, why does anyone actually ever manage to disconnect and leave?
Yeah, and I was actually going to ask you now, Jen, what can be the crunch time that actually makes, or for both of you to answer, but what is the kind of clinching point where someone goes, I can't do this anymore, I need to get out of here? like for my sister, it was quite a sort of obvious and sudden eruption into physical violence. But if this sort of coercive control and subtle, it sounds quite subtle manipulation is happening and gradually escalating over time, then how does it get to the point where you think, I need to find help and get out?
Well, it's not just one point. I think it's actually several points. In fact, on average, in Australia at least, women leave on average about 5-6 times and keep going back. So it's the gaslighting is really significant, and that's a brilliant description that Justine's given us of gaslighting. And because it's so subtle, and because you do start to second guess yourself, and your example, Justine, was good of someone looking, being accused of looking around a shopping centre, so she just looks down now and starts to second guess her own motives. And then, am I going mad, or am I what he says I am, which is I'm, a horrible, selfish person and I just never support him well enough. Oh, I better get better at supporting him. For many years, a woman can actually just be on the trajectory of, I need to improve myself so that I can be a better wife to him or a better partner to him. When she starts to get a bit of an inkling that it can't actually be all my fault, because she will be blamed for everything. He won't be apologising for anything. She will be doing the apologising and taking the blame and responsibility for so much. After however many years down the track that it is, it's often when kids start to press his buttons, and let's just continue on talking about he being a perpetrator and she being a victim, because statistically speaking, that's basically what it is. But it can be the other way around. But if when the kids get old enough to start pressing the buttons, or he has to take a bit of responsibility for disciplining kids or whatever it might be, that's often when a woman is starting to think, hold on, no, that's not fair. If it's not fair for my kids, it hasn't been fair for me. And she might start to put a bit of a toe in the water with friends. Oh, what does your husband do this? Does your husband do that?
Right. Yeah.
If she gets a good response or an understanding response, she can go a bit further with those conversations. Often, and over many, many years, she's been getting responses that are particularly unhelpful, can I say. Having heard many of these responses, it's been like, oh, he said what? That will just shove her straight back into her self-doubt again, and she'll go on for another couple of years in self-doubt before she might put a toe in the water again. It's often when she actually comes to understand that she cannot be to blame for everything, that a woman will start then to reach out for more serious assistance. And it's not necessarily assistance to leave him by any means, because if I can just explain it to him in the right way, or I can just say it in the right tone of voice, or if I just wait for the right time and explain to him how I'm feeling, he'll understand, and then he'll change, and and we'll be able to get along. So that's usually what she starts asking for help in, and it's then a bit further down the track that she might try leaving, and often it's, let's have a break for a few months, and surely that will, smack in between the eyes. Surely you'll get it then that I'm serious about this, and then she'll go back and it'll start all over again. So, yep, it's many points.
The thing that scares me about what Jenny was just saying was that so many people in society, and I'm sure that Justine has seen this as well, that so many people who come into contact with these women, of whom we know now there is just such a huge proportion, but the people who come into contact will actually reinforce how they're kind of soothing the whole situation, saying it's their fault, because people will just reinforce that idea that if you just talk to him, basically a rational person would understand. So there'll be a lot of reinforcing from friends and family, and even half friends.
Yeah, I guess it's what goes on behind closed doors isn't always obvious to people. So they might look at this guy and go, oh, how could this be happening? Like, he seems so respectable. He's such a lovely guy. Everyone loves him.
And definitely perpetrators groom not just the victim survivor, but everyone around them. And that was definitely a point that's come out of Hannah Clark's situation, where he was appeared on the surface to be a respectful and personable person. So given the benefit of the doubt of not coming in after breaching the restraining order, and of course, he then took that opportunity to end her life and the life of her children. And so, recognising that people can, on the surface, actually appear to be someone that's personable, but in fact, they're not a nice guy who sometimes abuses someone. They're an abuser who can actually fake being a nice guy. But with that shame, I think you said about other people saying, if you just do this or do that, it will work out. Yeah. That layer of shame for a victim survivor to say, I should be able to do this. And when you add layers like perhaps, multicultural, cultural, yes, expectations of families that once you marry, you stay and you make it work, then that can be another added factor, that level of shame. Also just that response, so that we talk about the fight, flight and freeze response, but we also know there's the fawn trauma response, and that becomes a learned response, just to keep your head down and not make any waves and just continue on in that way. But also the financial. So as we said, often part of the process is to restrict access to finances. We know that in every state in Australia it's almost impossible to get a rental. Your choices are really narrow and slim to actually physically set up house somewhere else. And it, always seems absurd that the person who's the victim survivor tends to be the person who, ends up having to leave. And so looking at, staying at home services, and I'm sure in lots of other states they have those as well, where the victim survivor is actually the person that stays at home and the person who's actually perpetrating the abuse is the person that needs to move on. I had a family where the option was there to move into a refuge, but it was 2 hours away from their current location. It meant that children would have to leave school. It meant that, the victim survivor would actually have to leave her, small but important safety net of supporters. So when she looked at all those options, rooting her children up who had already gone through a lot of trauma, being away from the the only people she felt connected to, she made the choice to stay. And these are all real implications for women.
Yes, personally I know of someone who was experiencing domestic violence and they decided to end the marriage, but because he controlled all the finances, he immediately cut off all of her access to any money at all, and she became homeless. And this was absolutely shocking, and there were children involved as well. But one thing I want to ask you, Justine, is what happens when children are exposed to domestic violence? What actually happens to them?
They're really aware of what is going on. They often feel fearful, but they also, have a real lot of mixed emotions because, they love the people involved here. They love mum and dad, but they feel very fearful for what has happened. They also, it becomes really normalised to think about having to call the police, about having the police coming in the night time. Even when physical violence isn't happening to mum, it might be happening to the property around. So mum's phone's regularly smashed, property is damaged, windows are broken. And so they're constantly walking on eggshells. They are constantly fearful of what might, use the term, Jenny, pressing someone's buttons. And so, mum may be saying, we've got to be good, we've got to be well behaved. So that creates that fawn response often in children where they think if I just be good, then mum and dad won't fight. So it really, creates that trauma response. When we look at things like the ACEs study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, we know that, the long-term potential impact for children who experience adverse experiences like witnessing family and domestic violence can have a whole lot of implications as they move through their teenage years and into adulthood, right down to, physical symptoms that they may experience. But we know that, mental health issues will definitely, increase in the likelihood of children who are witnessing family and domestic violence. So they may exhibit, pain-based behaviours as they go through their teenage years. And it may be that this is the only example of a relationship they've seen. It might be what they've seen in pornography and what they've seen in their home. So unfortunately, when they then look at relationships for themselves, they may never have actually experienced what a healthy relationship looks like. And so that's why healthy relationship education is so important in our school systems for all of our children, for children who have experienced family and domestic violence, but also for our broader primary intervention of every single child who will eventually be our adults of the future.
you're currently working with children to try and not only protect them, is that right, but educate them as to why this is wrong and the right kind of behaviours?
Absolutely. So in a couple of my roles, I do primary prevention. So with my role with WA Child Safety Services, we are able to support schools with their healthy and respectful relationship education. So we do work directly with children, but also supporting teachers and staff. And then I do secondary and tertiary intervention in my, private practice work, counselling with children in my social work role who have already experienced that impact of family and domestic violence.
And how do they come to you? Are they referred by someone or?
Yeah, so when it's primary prevention, it's for every single child. So, that's through our protected behaviours type programs in school settings. So every single child should get that information. And then with children who have already witnessed family and domestic violence, so in my particular role in private practice, there may be referrals through child protection, it may be referrals through family violence shelters, and then I'm also a social worker in a school, so that may be through children actually starting to exhibit a range of changes in their behaviour, and that may be because of what they're experiencing at home.
Yeah.
Actually, I was just thinking that with the more subtle, if dad or mum hits the other parent, that's more obvious. But once again, with the more subtle things like coercive control, it's a lot for a child to even conceptualise that.
To understand.
Yeah.
So how do they...
It's that walking on eggshells. It's that constant fear that something I do or say or something mum might say is going to set dad off.
The other thing that with many of the women that I've worked with over the years, they will say things like the father would, even at the dinner table, engage the children against the mum. Oh, isn't she silly? Isn't mum a duffer? Look how dumb mum is. Isn't she ridiculous? And so the family dynamic gets set up quite early on as well, that it's dad and the kids are all the smart ones and mum's the dumb one.
And maybe even turn the children against mum.
Yeah. But is their goal to get the kids to be with him or just to pick on that one?
Controlling.
Control.
All about power and control.
But why is it? What is it about these guys that makes them want to control someone or a situation?
Janice has just demonstrated it very nicely that when Jenny says what she just said, sensible human beings like Janet will think, but they must be, they must be thinking these things at the front of their brain. They must be like the thoughts come into their brain and they're acting on it really knowingly. And I was going to say, I would love to hear from the two of you because, I don't want to just hear the sound of my own voice, but I was going to say I'm particularly interested in this kind of characteristic of people. So please speak on.
I mean, we would say that domestic violence is a choice because very often these perpetrators, they're not doing this in the same way in their workplace. They're making a choice to not do that there. So, it is a choice. And whilst absolutely drugs and alcohol can exacerbate it, without a doubt, it's making sure we're not being able to blame it on things like drugs and alcohol. Again, one of the primary interventions needs to be the understanding around the distinct gender drivers for intimate partner violence, for violence against women, because I think, as Jenny said, there is a level of acceptance of violence against women. Just like I said, in pornography, it tends to be the male dominating and violent towards the female. And people are just accepting that is okay. The acceptance of that decision-making and limiting women's independence, the rigid gender stereotyping, which, yes, we have had a, small move towards changes and a whole nother, I'm sure, hours of discussion around the Barbie movie, which I loved. But in that, there was people, horrified, why was the whole, CEO team, depicted to be male? Well, actually, in Australia, of the 200 top companies in Australia, there's only 14 female CEOs. So that's actually we haven't moved anywhere near far enough to represent women, in independent, decision-making in public life and relationships. And we still have a massive gender inequality. So when you really nut down to primary intervention, it's, having that better understanding as a whole community around the impact of gender inequality on family and domestic violence. And until we make those changes, so I'd really recommend people to look at Our Watch and the Let's Change the Story framework around primary intervention and gender inequality, because as a whole community we need to make those changes.
So is education of across the board,
yes,
of everybody, adults and children?
Yeah, everybody.
One of the right,
and men and women.
Yeah.
And we talk about family violence. It's actually, and a lot of the campaigns will talk about it is a men's issue, as in men need to get on board and have an understanding around this. And it can't be all about the victim survivors having to do something different. It's about all of us, and everywhere about being a respectful, healthy relationships and communication. We still have a long way to go.
And a lot of the messaging is really around women. If you find yourself in this situation, or if you recognise that you're being treated this way, then get out. That's actually putting the onus on the person who's being victimised to do it. The messaging really needs to be shifted to men. Just stop it.
Yeah. I wish it was that simple.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure Justine and Jenny wish it was that simple too. Hey, if you could wave your magic wands and just revolutionise the world, let alone Australia, overnight, what sort of things would you do? Like, what would you institute? You've got all the money in the world. What would you bring in?
So I think it would be at all levels. It needs to be at primary, secondary and tertiary. So for primary, education around healthy respectful relationships, not in a tick-the-box way, but actually in-depth, across curriculum, age-appropriate, across all year levels. For that secondary, so more targeted services for our vulnerable groups, Aboriginal women, women with disabilities, more targeted services, and tertiary to continue, and it is happening, but there needs to be more services that are appropriate and involving the voice of victim survivors for women that have experienced, as well as that training and understanding for those first responders that are going to respond to tertiary, so training for police and others around things like coercive control.
I'd agree with that. I would throw money at you, Justine. That would be fantastic. The other thing to say is when working with women who are finding themselves in these very, very difficult relationships and not really knowing what to do, they're quite powerless. And feeling like they have no option. I've just got to stay here. I can't afford to move out. I've got nowhere to go. There are no options out there. And one of the things that I do with women is actually to help them think through what their options are. And their options, it generally comes down to 3 options. You can stay, carry on as you are, and we'll cart you off in a straitjacket in a year or 2. You could leave. Let's talk about where you could go and how you could get some money, and that's really quite difficult. Or you can stay in the relationship and just work out how you're going to protect yourself emotionally from this. But, once you start to protect yourself emotionally in a relationship, you're removing the emotional punching bag away from this fellow, and he's not going to like that. And so often his behaviour ramps up. So they're not great options. So I think I would be pouring money into giving women options.
Yep.
Yeah.
Options. We want money and options.
Money and options.
Yeah.
And so if someone comes to you and says, my partner says that he wants to control all of our finances, but that's because he's really good with money and, he's caring for me, but I'm just got a little bit of a feeling inside that something's not quite right. What can we do as friends and supporters who may not have seen any of this behind the scenes kind of behaviour? How can we support other women?
So we can just say, we're here for you. I'm here. Please keep talking to me about, when you've getting these warning signs about what's going on. If at any point you feel unsafe, let's think about a safety plan. So, encouraging perhaps, if they're getting to the point where they're starting to feel, unsafe, packing a bag with important documents, having access to, things that they might need, packing, photocopying things, having a bag at someone else's house, putting them in contact, even if it's 1-800-RESPECT as a starting point, which is a national line, which then could put them into contact with local services. But really saying, I'm here for you, I'm listening to you, I see you, I believe you, and I'm not going anywhere. And even if they make it difficult for you to see me, we'll work out ways that we can do that. Just don't leave your friend because they have to they cancel the night out and, they don't come and see you as much as they used to. Don't stop seeing them. They need you now more than ever.
Yeah. Incredible. And I guess the same applies to the guys too. If they kind of hear about something a bit amiss about a friend of theirs, a male friend of theirs. Yeah.
Call it out. Don't let that behaviour, don't just laugh it off. Call it out and call it out. There's been some really great television ads around that where, role models, how you can call things out. So again, more public campaigns around that is important as well.
Yeah, well, being in advertising, we should get behind that.
Absolutely. Yes, you should. There is, quite obviously in chatting to you, like just so very much that still needs to be done.
Oh, yeah.
Because it goes so deep.
Yeah.
It goes so deep.
Can't believe it's so prevalent. I mean, 40% of households.
And that's only what we know of.
Yes, exactly. Because, with my sister, for example, I only found out about all of this after it had happened because she was probably not ashamed, but just knew that I wouldn't probably approve of them moving in together. I would have advised her against it. And also she probably did feel, I don't know, she was not doing the most well-advised thing. So, yeah, she just didn't ever come to me for support, which I was devastated at as well.
Shame is a really big part of it. Shame is a huge part of it.
Right.
A huge part. And shame links into our brains straight to our fight-flight system. So you want to avoid shame. That's an emotion to avoid. It's debilitating. So when a woman starts to feel shame that she's being treated in a way that she doesn't, maybe it's not quite right, I don't really know, or believing the gaslighting. I am really dumb. I'm bad at relationships. I can't actually support a man. I just, there's so much shame and so much fear around. But if somebody says to me, he's not a good husband, my goodness, what on earth do you do then? I can't look after myself. I can't get enough money. I can't even go there.
Thank you so much for shedding some light on this very serious topic and a very, challenging issue that we have.
Quite obviously, the conversation is enormous and this is but a speck.
And it's not just women 40 plus, obviously, but all women and children as well. And it's just been incredible to have you
but
both.
It's worried grandmas as well. So yes. I was going to say thank you both. This has been fantastic.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Gorgi, thanks for listening in today. We hope you enjoyed this ep.
But we'd really love to hear more from you. We'd love to know exactly what you actually think of us and our guests.
So if you're on Spotify, you can rate us. We love stars. And on Apple Pods, write us a little blurb. Let us know what you think and hopefully we can keep going. Apple loves their algorithms and we love you. So thanks for listening. We really enjoy your company.
See you next week on She Wasn't Born Yesterday.
Hope 103.2. Thanks for listening.